Good morning. Today is Tuesday, March 5th. It's Super Tuesday. As you well know by this time, you've probably heard lots and lots about what's going on in 17 different states where they are holding primaries. And I want to talk about an issue that is very complicated and associated with the right to vote. I want to talk about voter IDs because there's no standard rule in this country about what is a valid voter ID. And that is an issue that confronts us every year at election time. And there are many states that use the voter IDs to prohibit groups of people from voting. In some states, it's difficult to get a voter ID. And it's especially true in states where there is discrimination against certain sections of the population. For instance, if you are an indigenous person and you're living in a state that requires you to have a home address, but you don't have a home address because you live on a reservation. And there are no addresses on the reservation. There are post office boxes. So in those states, they can prohibit you from voting because you don't have a home address. A post office box is not considered a home address. And that's just one of the things that can go on with voter IDs and getting one. So I'm in favor of having a voter ID, but I am in favor of a standardized law for voter IDs, no matter where you live in the country. And I don't believe if you're homeless and you're living in your car, you're entitled to vote. You have no home address. You could be anywhere in the United States and decide you want to vote. Because in my mind, by doing that, you're skipping many of your responsibilities to the communities. Because if you're living in your car or something like that, you're not paying state taxes or city taxes or whatever it is. You're not paying for the right to be a citizen of that state somewhere. So there are a lot of things associated with getting a voter ID that would help clean up some of the messes that exist in this country. So what should make up a valid voter ID? Have you thought about that? I really hadn't thought about that until I came across the primary season, and I had to think about what makes a valid voter ID. Well, first of all, I would say that in order to have a valid voter ID for wherever you live, that you should have to live in that location 6 months and 1 day every single year. Because I have many friends who come on Long Island, live on Long Island, have homes on Long Island, but in the wintertime, they're in Florida. So if you're in Florida for more time than you're in Long Island, even though you own a home in both places, then you should be voting in Florida. Things like that. It's little things like that that need to be considered, but they don't need to be out of sight. There should be no requirement that you have to have a job. There should be no requirement that you have to have an education of a certain level. I believe in order to vote, you should be able to read, but I don't know if I would make that a requirement. I could argue that you must speak English, but I don't think that is fair either. So it's very tricky to decide what's the proper type of voting ID. But in essence, it should be standardized. It shouldn't be different from state to state. Now, living conditions in certain states vary. In many states, we have large cities. And in some states, there really isn't a large city. There's a state capital, perhaps, but like in the population of certain states is very small. There are several states in this country that do not have 1 million people residing in the state. There's not many of those, but they do exist. So the regulations for voter ID have to be, I'll call it strict, but not overly strict, not insanely strict. And then maybe everybody should have a voter ID with a photo on it. Or maybe they're going to use your driver's license as a photo ID. But not everybody drives. So you're a driver and you've driven for 50 years, but then you can't drive anymore. Is your voter ID invalid? No. So there's a lot of little items that go into the creation of what would be an appropriate voter ID. But we shouldn't make it crazy. There might be 4 or 5 major points, one of which says that you are a resident of the state for at least 6 months and 1 day. The other thing is that you're not a convicted felon in any way, shape, or form, perhaps. Would we allow murderers to vote? Yeah. If you're living in prison, does that qualify as an address, a valid address to get a voter ID? Maybe that should be the case. If you committed some crime and you're on probation for 2 or 3 years, should you be allowed to vote? Who knows? Who knows? But those are considerations. And I don't know that we've considered everything properly. But I don't believe that we need to have 50 different rules for voter ID. There should be one rule, one set of criteria that works all over the place. All over the place. And the place being our great country, or our not so great country anymore. So that's what I think about voter IDs, and I think about this today on Super, which in my mind is a very, very important day. It's an opportunity for us as a free nation to exercise our great privileges, which is the right to vote. And I believe that everybody is entitled to that privilege. But it's up to the state in this country to equalize the privilege. I do not believe that there should be 50 different sets of rules for who can vote and who cannot. So let us hope together that there will be a standardized voting criteria all across our great nation. Let's hope for the best. Take care. Have a great day.